Reconsider Christ podcast provides real-life examples on how Christ works to interact with our lives. Our guests paint on the canvas of life their stories of joy, heartache, struggle, and victory. You will learn more about the true nature of Christ, for it is time to reconsider Christ. How do you stay sane as you build a software company that will sell for $1.3 billion while your marriage pummels you against the rocky shores of defeat? How do you find peace while rising to national prominence as a contributor on Fox News and CNBC while grieving your mistakes in your second marriage? David Lykken answers with an ongoing pursuit of Christ, which ranges from hand-to-hand combat over pride and infidelity and forgiveness to deep spiritual encounters with Christ. Christ never gave up on David, and he now enjoys a deepening relationship with Christ and his family. David is the founder of Transformational Mortgage Solutions, which helps leaders in the mortgage industry transform their companies around process, culture, and presence. David has distinguished himself throughout his career and is a recognized leader and influencer in the banking arena. Well, hello, David.
Hello, Gene. Good to be here with you.
It's great to be with you, and thank you so much for being a guest on our Reconsider Christ podcast. We have known each other for a while. You're the famous, good-looking guy, and I'm just Gene. So
that's debated. I suggest your wife might think differently. Hopefully, she does. Yeah, you're good. You're an awesome guy. But I love your podcast and what you're doing. I love Reconsidering Christ because it is something that we all need to do and should do.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. So the way we always start is with what are some of your first memories or recollections of Christ and at what time in life did that happen?
It was one of those moonlit nights in Minnesota where I grew up when we had fresh fallen snow and we had a full moon. It would light up a room. It's almost like daylight. It's just so bright and it was so magnificent. I was having trouble going to sleep, so I was putting myself to sleep pretending I was a Christian DJ, and I'd say, coming to you from Dave Licken's bedroom in Battle Lake, Minnesota, here's another song, and then I would sing a Christian song, Jesus loves me, this I know, and I would have fun, and I was just enjoying myself, kind of entertaining myself in a pretend DJ world that there would ever become Christian radio at that point. And as I was doing that, this real interesting it's like a mist came into the room, Gene. That's how I could describe it. It was just a mist, and it filled up the room. It's kind of like you notice it, but you don't really. It's not like it's wow. It just was there. But what wowed me was in the midst of that, a presence came into the room that I can just only describe as unconditional love, and I didn't hear a voice. I didn't hear one of those audible voices. I just knew it was the presence of God. And I knew I was accepted, and I accepted Jesus. I asked him into my heart at that point, and that began my personal relationship. It didn't begin in a Sunday school. It didn't begin because my mom and dad told me about it. It began with that experience, which launched a personal relationship with the Lord.
That's very interesting. Several of our podcast guests have talked about similar situations that they have, and some of us are more open because of our personalities to that type of experience, and it just really confirms and starts the relationship. So that's very interesting to hear. And why was that important to you at that point? The focus was unconditional love. Tell me about that.
Well, that's a really good point because I grew up in a stoic Norwegian family, 100% Norwegian or almost. We did a 23andMe, found out we're not quite 100% as we were pride ourselves in, but it was a stoic Norwegian family, Gene. So, it's one of those things. I told you I loved you when I gave birth to you. I'll let you know if anything changed. I did not hear from my parents. I knew they loved me, but I never experienced a hug where I was held. And I was a kid who, my love language, I love the 5 love languages. It's a very popular book. And mine is physical touch. I love being hugged, and I did not get that. So when I experienced unconditional love, the presence of love in my life, it spoke to my inner man. It spoke to a need that I badly needed. It's also interesting that need also later was where I struggled because of that need as I went into and developed as a young adult into puberty. And of course, you could only imagine where all that went.
Yeah. But let's talk about for a moment in college, you and I have talked about quite a few times about, there's because of choices we make, shame kind of builds up. And for our audience, a lot of them are at that point where they feel like, I've just messed up so many times. There's nothing, there's no hope for me. And talk to me about kind of the buildup of shame through the college years, and then we'll go into the start of your business career and when you kind of re-engage with Christ. And
well, I think when you have the Lord in your life, you have invited Jesus in there, whether you're having an active relationship. In my case, it was because I didn't know I could and how to, but still truth lives in me. And so I knew the things I was doing. Now, I didn't struggle with drugs. I enjoyed alcohol, I enjoyed the beer, some college beer parties and some good times. But I really struggled in the area of the affection. I didn't have a grid for that this was wrong to engage in fornication is what the Bible calls it, but really enjoying women and enjoying that affection. I had a sense that it was wrong. Now, my wife struggled with the same thing when she was growing up. She had a stronger grid. She knew it was wrong. And so I think we come to that point of shame and guilt that comes on us for the things we do, especially as we grow. And so when you start getting to the point where you look at the things you've done in your life, and what really gets you is, for me, it's what I had done to in enjoying women. They enjoyed it, but we all did. Physical pleasures, physical pleasures. Nothing in that case, when in the proper context is a wonderful thing. But it did, when it's out of the proper God context, it does bring guilt. It brings shame in there. And as soon as you start walking with the Lord and really purposing to be sincere in your faith, guess what? The enemy is out there. You think you're doing this, and he starts pointing that finger. I love Brene Brown, what she talks about. Enemy is one of the biggest enemies is shame. And I had to struggle with that, Gene. I had a lot of shame for things I did. I enjoyed it, but then I was ashamed of it. And I think a lot of people during that time, especially those that had accepted the Lord or had a heart towards the Lord, struggled with that. I did. Certainly my wife did, before we ever got together, before we even knew each other. People don't understand it was even more common in the culture than today. During those years, it's an amazing thought to think that, but that would be. Well, I think Gene, it's because of our religious construct. I mean, I speak sometimes negatively about religion, only the aspect of the condemnation. Yeah, in that we should be convicted of what we're doing, but not condemned. I think religion can, not in all cases, not condemning religion in the broadest sense, but a religious spirit or with someone who has that condemnation is suffering under a religious framework that is very punishing, constricting, and inhibits growth and keeps you from growing in Christ. Yeah. And so you've got all that in the back of your mind. You're dating a woman who's going to become your first wife. You're starting a career in the banking business, and this guy says, "You gotta go to this meeting with me." Yeah, that's a great story. I'm on my second marriage. My first marriage, I married the gal that I was dating in college, and I went like this: got married, check. Now let's go focus on the career. Right. I didn't focus. I didn't have a concept of. I saw my parents. I was raised in a performance culture. Go get a good career. Focus on get married, start having kids, and get that. We didn't have any kids, but I started focusing on that. And I wasn't paying attention. So what was going on at home was quite different. What's going on in my career? My career is blossoming. Yeah. But I was not paying attention to what was going on at home, and she became lonely and took up with a pastor in the community, happened to be her old boyfriend, and took up with a pastor in our community. And that became, I didn't even know what was going on. But in the meantime, I'm at work, and I got invited by one of my coworkers, and he asked me, "Are you believe yourself a Christian?" I said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Well, why do you think you are?" And I was being kind of a smart ass at the time. I go, "Well, it's because I'm an American." And I knew that would just kind of irritate him a little bit, so I enjoyed that. He said, "There's got to be more to that." And then I told my experiences. "Yeah, you're a believer. Well, then why don't you come to one of these Christian events?" I said, "There's a Christian meeting night. Would you like to come?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm married. I have a good attorney. I've got a good career. I check. Yeah, I should probably get some God back into my life, some relationship like that. I was going to the same denomination I'd grown up in, but it wasn't having any impact. So I was hungry for something, and it spoke to me. So I go to this meeting. Now get this, Gene, if this isn't framed up. Now, I was a young banker. We're in residential finance. I was working the mortgage side of the business, and we were financing this one particular builder. He was 100% Norwegian. He had a big fiery red beard and a red afro, and I liked this guy. I was drawn to him. I didn't know he was a believer at the time, but I walked through the front door, and there he is. And this guy looked like something that came off one of the Viking boats. He just had to put a helmet with horns on him, and he was right in character. But so anyway, I come through the door. He goes, "Dave, what are you doing here?" And he gave me a big hug. Gene, when I was sitting in that Christian businessman's meeting, that same presence filled the room. And that same presence stood right before me. And it called on my heart. I broke down sobbing. I knew that I had to recommit to the Lord. And I wasn't too certain about the speaker, and I wasn't too certain about the guy that greeted me at the door, but I knew what was there I needed to have in my life. And I recommitted my life to the Lord. And then it's like a rocket was attached to me, and I took off in the things of God.
And what's interesting is you did something that a lot of successful business people do. They become Christian, and they think, that I've got to do something that's professional ministry. It's not enough to follow Christ. It's not enough to be that witness in the marketplace. You got to do something else. So you start pursuing your dream of wanting to be in professional ministry. Walk us through that.
And I had this one ministry that had been so instrumental early in my life that I just had the dream of working for this ministry one day, Gene. It was so exciting to me. And I positioned for that. I wasn't ever thinking that I would do that because I saw myself as a banker, but I always thought, how awesome would it be if I could get a job with this ministry? Again, not realizing the whole time that my wife at that time was torn between two lovers, as that song goes, feeling like a fool. She loved me, but she loved this other pastor. Mm-hmm. And it was ripping up, and I was clueless. So guess what happened, Gene? Things come to a head sometimes at the most awkward and inopportune times.
Yes.
I get a job offer to run a big division of this ministry. I was so excited. We're going to have to relocate from the Pacific Northwest at that time. We're going to have to relocate down into Texas. Mm-hmm. And I was ready for it. I was so excited about it. I came home and I told my wife, we're moving to Texas. And I didn't see any joy. I saw her head come down, and she came out. She goes, "Dave, I can't do it." I go, what do you mean you can't do it? We've been wanting this. You've been blessed by this. We get a chance to go in. I could be the next. And I named a name. Mm-hmm. And I really realized I should have caught a clue at that point. Maybe there was some more development. So what happened is that's when her affection, love for this other man, other pastor came into the midst. And Gene, it tore me up. Not only did I have to call that ministry and say, well, I'll come, but my wife won't come. And they go, "Hey, Dave, I hate to say this, but that's not going to work. You need to focus in and get number one thing. You need to get your family focused. This is taking you by surprise." It crushed me, Gene. Not only did I lose the ministry, she then chose to go with this other gentleman. I went to my pastor, devastated. He goes, "Dave, you've been believing." And at that point, we separated. I've been believing for my marriage to survive. And Gene, it didn't. And he pulled me aside. It was failed. And then I couldn't see it. I just was so blinded. I cared. I loved her. And it came to a point, Gene, where my pastor pulled me aside and said, "Son, you need to move on." And I go, "How do I do this? I'm hurting in such a deep way." I went on a business trip. I was in San Antonio, Texas. At the time, I was living in the Pacific Northwest. I'm down in San Antonio, Texas. Texas, always, that's where we live now. And it's such a powerful place. You and I live in the same community. And I went to San Antonio, Texas, La Mansión del Norte. There's a hotel. I got down on my knees. I said, "Lord, I've never hurt like this. This is the most painful thing. A divorce. I understand why you hate it, because the pain I'm feeling is so intense." Gina had an unusual experience. It says it's like, again, I had another out-of-body experience. I saw myself there, my arms up, my head back, and just reaching. And the Lord showed me a tree trunk inside of me. From about my navel down was a tree trunk, and the upper part of the tree had been cut off and was gone. He said, Dave, this represents your marriage. It was cut down. Your wife, soon to be ex-wife, removed herself and the upper part of the tree. The reason you're feeling for pain is you're bleeding from that stump. You still have your commitment. You still have everything going on, and your love for her, your love for this marriage, you didn't want to fail. And I'm going to deliver you. As I'm watching this, Gene, it's like so crystal clear to me to this day. I saw this hand come down. As I was there, standing there, I was my hands up, and I was just asking God, and I saw myself there, and this hand came down right through me, right into my mouth, and like a pneumatic claw grabbed onto that tree trunk that was cut off, that had represented my half of the commitment. It grabbed onto that like a dentist would grab onto a molar that he's pulling, extracting. This hand came and started pulling, Gene, on that stump. And like a dentist would pull on that, is the only example I could give you. I could feel things snapping and coming loose down to my toenails. It had gone all the way, my commitment. I mean, when we said we become one flesh, it goes all the way through me. It twisted and turned, and as it pulled, it came up and out, and he held it in front of my eyes. And he said, Dave, this represents your marriage. And he wadded it up. You are now free. I'm setting you free. Now, I thought he set me free from even all my problems. So I went in and I started dating again. It's a whole nother issue I struggled with. I went back to how I used to date, affection and all of that. But I got delivered.
Let's stop right there for just a second.
Okay.
And talk about this, because it's interesting. You know, you had your career, you wanted family, you're checking off all these boxes, and then one of these boxes becomes undone. But you didn't get mad at God.
No.
Why
no.
not?
That's a great question. Why did I not get mad at God? You know what? When you experience God like I did, first time, filled my bedroom, and I knew it's unconditional love. When you experience God, when I recommitted my heart to him, it was unconditional love that was present there. How can you get mad at unconditional love? I knew it wasn't him that caused this to happen. I had a construct at this point. There's good and evil. That evil had entered in. I didn't blame my ex-wife. I knew that I hadn't paid attention. I knew I ignored that. So I'm complicit in this problem. There's two people there, and she went another direction. I wish she hadn't, and I mean, she did. I can't blame this man because he still loved her from when he dated her in college. And they had this relationship and this pastor. And so it was confusing. It was torn. But I mean, it was interesting. She used to go around the house thinking torn between two lovers, feeling like a fool. I remember that. And I go, and I still didn't get it. I was never mad at God, Gene, because I never blamed God for that. It's a miracle because a lot of people turn to blame and getting angry. Yeah, there's anger at that. You have moments, anger towards individuals and people who caused that. But I always went to my knees because I knew where bitterness and anger would get you. I'd seen that too many times, and that's like drinking arsenic and hoping the other person will die. I didn't want that. I just wanted to be healed, Gene.
And so the divorce happens, and this Norwegian, who's, I guess, probably in your early 30s at this time.
Yep, I was. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. So you're in your early 30s. You are not getting hugged anymore. You're looking for acceptance. Your career's going great, but it's crickets at the house.
It's crickets, yeah.
So how do you respond to all that?
Two interesting things happened at that point. I met my wife now, Nancy, who we've been married now almost 37 years, and we started dating. It was wonderful. But just before we started dating, God redirected. Remember, I had everything in my career taken and ripped out, everything I'd wanted, and he planted a new vision on me. I had a Boeing engineer give me a Heathkit computer, that was a microcomputer, the first microcomputer. This was even before the IBM PC was invented. He said, Dave, you like gadgets? Let me give this thing to play with. And so I brought it home. I didn't have anything else. It's crickets in the house. So I started playing and taught myself programming, how to program a computer, elementarily so. Right. And it could type, it could calculate. And one night I fell asleep on the keyboard, literally went head down as you see, and there's nothing but the same letter all the way across the screen. And in the midst of that, God gave me a dream. I believe it's God. God gave me a dream, and it was for a new computer company. It was my new career. God said, I want to have you go into technology. And I had a dream of a software package. I woke up in the morning and I was shaking off and drinking my coffee, and I wrote down every screen that I could see in my dream. And what happened was next was that I took it to the bank head of technology. He goes, when did you learn how to write a software spec? I said, software what? I said, this is a storyboard. It's a software spec. I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. I have no reference for that. I'm a music major. Right. And he said, this is really good. So I started a new career. I took a leave of absence. I took the last of the little bit of equity I had left in my home, and I started a software company. That company went public, and it ended up going, I enjoyed part of that journey. Others came in, venture capital, and so we got that. It sold later for $1.3 billion. So I knew God had given me a wonderful idea. At the same time, he brought me a new wife. Now, because I had not a new construct, I dated when I was dated in the world. And so I met my wife. I needed hugs. I started hugging. We started doing a little bit more than hugging. And in the midst of us hugging, she would one time break down crying. I go, I wanted a man who would just respect my boundaries. I struggle with this area. And I failed to protect her heart. I just was a guy with too much hormones who had the high needs, Gene, and I did not. So it laid some foundational cracks at the very beginning. And that's one of those things where we still work through a lot of those things because I didn't establish that relationship on trust. I didn't even have a grid for that, Gene. I just thought, hey, we're attracted to each other. You're turned on, I'm turned on. Let's make something happen here. Two Christian people. We were failing.
David just described his astounding career success after the infidelity of his first wife. Now, as his career continues to soar, David has to deal with his own infidelity in his second marriage. David's life graph reminds us how many people struggle at a personal level while achieving at work. In David's life graph, we see the ups and downs of his personal struggles. Yet we are encouraged by the second line, showing how Christ continues to build David into a man of God.
But we've now, 36 years, 37 years almost, we had to struggle through a lot of stuff, Gene, mistrust and all of that. And it's been a struggle at times. At one point, Gene, because here's another thing, because I had never been held, because I didn't know what it was like, and the only time that ever showed up was women, I got all my affirmation that I'm a man when I messed around with women. So now I'm married and remarried, and I go on a business trip, and I have a failure. It's a one-time failure. It was just devastating. I came home, Gene, and I ran right to my pastor. Didn't even come home. I went right to my pastor. And he heard me. I was broken up. I said, I failed. The shame. Oh, I failed so badly. And he looked at me and said, Dave, I don't think you'll ever do this again. I said, no, the pain that this, I don't ever want to experience this again. And he says, I don't think you should tell your wife. I think this is just keep this between you and Jesus. Now, a lot of people say, half the crowd I say this to, Gene, say, that's a great idea. The other half go, oh, that was a bad decision. It was the decision. And it didn't come out until 18 years later when I'm asked to be an elder in a church. Now, the particular elder was an ex-professional athlete. He married an ex-cheerleader in a professional sport. And so they had lived the lifestyle. They knew everything that goes on. There was nothing. They struggled with all their struggles before they'd been delivered of and came here. And he says, Dave, is there anything, before we go ahead and give you the thumbs up on being the elder here, is there anything you want to share with us? And I go, nope, I think you got the whole story. I totally forgotten about it, Gene, because in my mind, I confessed it. I confessed it to my pastor. And as I'm heading out the door, the Lord touched my heart. He says, there is one thing, David, you didn't tell him. I go, what? And then I go like, oh my gosh. And I said, his name is John. I said, John, Pastor John, sit down. There is something. I totally forgot about it and I explained it. And he heard the story, and he too said, you know what? 18 years ago, I can't imagine that that should need to come up. But let me bring it to the pastor, a senior pastor of our church, and we'll discuss it and we'll get back to you. But I'm probably at the point where, yeah, I don't know that it needs to come up. And I share this story because there's a lot of pain. It's well known. Our kids know it. But we talk about it openly, so it is a big thing that's going on. I won't mention the name of the pastors at this particular church, because when they took it to the senior pastor, what was not known was the pastor was having an affair, an inappropriate relationship with another member of the church on the staff. And when you're in sin, Gene, when you're operating in sin, you have a tendency to take a very harsh look and judge very harshly on the area where you're failing. And I got the phone call, you need to tell your wife. It was one of those moments where you go, I want to run. I wished I hadn't failed. I wished, and all the shame coming in on me, Gene. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. But on a Saturday morning, I sat down and shared. And think about my wife. We have 2 kids now. What can she do? Right. She's married. She loves me, but she's getting information. And now she can't go back in 18 years ago and have chosen to divorce me. We have 2 kids. It has created a place where we have had to work through things. I go back to this. I go, the best time to bring things out is when they happen, and just share things. And so don't bury things. Don't hide things, because when they do come out, they can come up in a much more painful way. And I look at that. And so we've struggled with that, still struggling with it. We're working through it. We're committed. We're going to go until death do us apart. But I think now I do consulting. I do my ministry, my executive coaching from the places of pain. I think we want to run from pain, Gene. We want to escape pain. And your podcast it documents so much pain and misery. But you look at what God can do with that, in the midst of that, and what redeeming qualities he can bring out of that. So our story is yet to be written, but one part of the story is we're committed. You'll see us buried side by side should the Lord tarry and we not go home. We're going to be buried side by side, and that our future generations can go look at our graveside and go, they struggled, but they stayed together.
Yeah. 2 interesting questions from that story, and kind of a compilation of what you've said up to this point. So first question, where are you and God now?
I have the most amazing relationship, because in the midst of my failures, some celebrated, some that I hid, some that I still working through some areas, I have a personal relationship with Abba Father, Papa God. God has become a daddy to me. I run with Jesus. I love the Chosen series. I love that series on television because it shows us a Jesus that is highly relational and mixed in and had a sense of humor, not a religious God, not that stained glass window God. Again, not putting down stained glass windows or the churches and those people that go there. That is a great place. But that is a place, if that's where you sincerely find God, that's fine. I didn't. I found God in this relationship that is with me side by side. He's with me all the time, Gene. And when I fail, when I struggle with something, and now it's more like, gosh, I wish he hadn't said that. It really hurts. I've got kids that say things, I say things, and those pains, I can run to him right now. So my relationship with God has never been better. He corrects me, and we still get the correction. So that's one scripture says, I know my daddy loves me because he corrects me. I know my God loves me because he corrects me. My Father corrects me. And so that's going on. That's really good. Business is going wonderful. God has blessed my business. There's some amazing things that happen. Of all the things, I found myself on national television, Gene. That was something, again, I didn't want to public speak, much less ever go on a national platform where millions would look at you. It's an extraordinary journey.
Yes, it is. So the second question from all that perspective then is, you've been badly hurt by pastors.
Yes.
Why haven't you given up on the church? You could just have a spiritual, personal experience. Why have you not given up on the church?
It's a great question. Many counselors that I've gone to working on things, many pastors I've gone to goes, it's amazing you still go to church after having your first marriage destroyed by a man. And then the second event where it that whether it was right or wrong, we don't get into that. I don't care to get into that because there's times where I'm going, wish I hadn't done that. And then there's times I had glad to done it. So that's something everyone can just sort that out for themselves, get good counsel on that. But what I found out that in that is God has been there through it all. And I find God, and it says, forsake not the assembling yourselves together. You're going to have to throw out, if you throw out any part of the Bible, Gene, you're going to have to throw out the whole Bible. And he says, forsake not the assemblies yourselves together. And the assemblies that we have right now are churches. That's the contract that we have and we work in. Is God going to design something new? I don't know. Right now, that's the one.
So your career, Dave, has been on this arc, left to right and up and rising. And you've gone from banking into more into just the mortgage lending industry, and then consulting for mortgaging, the mortgage industry, and on Fox News and CNBC and all those things. So you've hit all the marks in your career as people look at it. How did Christ impact your actions in that career?
Well, it's a really great point, because a Christ-centered career has a much greater chance of success than a career. And so many times I work with believers, business owners, that compartmentalize. I did that for years. I compartmentalized my business life and my spiritual life, my relationship with God. And it wasn't until those two got fully integrated that I start realizing the success that I've enjoyed. National television didn't show up until that was fully integrated. The consulting business, which I now love, it's a ministry. I've been doing this for 21 years, a business coach and business executive coach and business consultant. Didn't integrate and come together, because what happened, Gene, is I'm now doing what God called me to. There came an event where I was coming, we had sold the business, we're looking at what we're going to do. I told my wife we're going to retire, and she says no. I think we went back and forth on that. So I launched a consulting business. And what happened is that I didn't launch that. I didn't launch that on my own. God specifically called me. There was a moment in time where I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And I heard an audible voice. That's one of the times I heard an audible voice of the Lord. He says, I want you to go into consulting. I will give you the ability to speak in, let me say that again. I will give you the ability to speak into men and women's businesses so that you have the right to speak into their lives. My consulting business, my executive coaching business, is an opportunity to speak into the lives. I like what Sir Francis Assisi said, preach at all times, speak only when necessary. So my focus is not to go in and try to win them to the Lord, but lay down financial principles that are from an integrated place with the Lord, where it's integrated, not compartmentalized. And so you can introduce Christian business, godly concepts in business and integrate them in without using these and thous and make it sound like a religious construct. And biblical principles, I tell you, the book of Proverbs is the most powerful business book everyone needs to read. There's so much wisdom in that for business people.
Mm-hmm. Throughout your life and career and all these experiences we've talked about, what's the big experience where God or Christ just delighted you the most? What's that moment of delight?
There's a number of them. I think you think of the moment when I did get remarried and I just realized how God's grace done. That was certainly one. Watching our child be born, both of our daughters be born. We were in birth room. Our oldest daughter's adopted. Our youngest daughter's by natural, and it took a lot of faith to get them there. But really, the most amazing moments I have is every morning I get up and I journal and I come before the Lord. And when I do that, God shows up, Gene. He longs for that personal one-on-one communion. And when I sit there with my cup of coffee, I love those moments when I think of my daughter. I mean, think about your kids being born. It's what's an amazing, pivotal moment. But there have been some moments that happen sitting in my leather chair, looking out of my backyard and seeing what we've been blessed with. And those have been some of the most precious moments. They're defining, and they happen again and again. But it's really those one-on-one moments. I just had that again the other morning, where God was bringing me through something. He says, son, it has to do with forgiveness. You don't forgive from a place of feelings. You forgive from a place of a decision. And he showed me how to do that. Gene, that was one of those moments I can't begin to tell you. So it's when God shows up in a moment of need and he speaks to you personally in those quiet moments. That's a pivotal moment. Now that one will be trumped by another one because you'll have another need and he'll speak to you. Does that make sense?
It really does. Yes, it's an ongoing delight.
Yes.
It's a great way to describe it. So, well, David, thank you so much for being part of the podcast and for the things you've shared. And I know it's going to be very encouraging to our audience to hear the struggles, to hear the faith, to hear the victory that you've had in your life throughout. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me to be here with you, Gene. Blessings to you, and may this bless the audience.
Yes, thank you.
David reminds us, number one, the threat of personal failure is always present. Number two, a deep relationship with Christ guards us from and sustains us as we recover from failure. Number three, Christ is always with us. Peace.